Stefan, welcome.
Hey, Becca.
Mosaic.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So just to give you everyone a quick introduction, this is Stefan. He's a product manager at Mozilla AI. Thank you so much for carving out some time to join us and talk about open source AI stuff today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really great to be here, and thanks for putting this event together.
Of course. So I guess we can kick things off. I want to just we're going to talk a little bit about a specific kind of initiative that you guys are working on over at Mozilla AI called Blueprints. Maybe we can start with just kind of like the backstory of like what led Mozilla AI to create the Blueprints initiative.
Yeah, sure. So last year we spent quite a lot of time talking to developers, especially developers who were just getting started with AI and just starting to explore the space. And a common theme that kept coming up was that the space felt really overwhelming to most people. And people didn't really know which tools to use or trust, or how to get them working together nice and easily. And a lot of people were defaulting to using closed source models just because it felt kind of easier. So at Mozilla AI, we have a mission around making AI kind of trustworthy, accessible, open source. So with all this in mind, we basically started the Blueprints initiative as a community initiative to help developers get started prototyping with open source models and open source tools more easily, more quickly, and really to showcase the best of open source AI so that it becomes kind of like the default for developers who are starting out.
That's awesome. That's perfect kind of like background for the next question I'm going to ask you, which is, what are blueprints?
Yeah, sure. So blueprints are essentially flexible starter code solutions that are built in an opinionated way that help a user solve a specific use case. So each one is essentially a ready-to-run repo that you can kind of get started with in a couple lines of code. And they're all configured with open source models and open source tools. For example, we've got one around fine-tuning a speech-to-text model on common voice data. And we also kind of make a bit of an effort to try to make sure each of the blueprints come with some clear docs, like a working demo, and also like I think this one's quite important, a bit of context on the technical choices that were made while developing. So basically, someone can come to one, like a developer who's kind of new, try it out quickly, understand the trade-offs, and make a decision as to whether like the blueprint is actually right for the project that they're working on. And so far, we've mostly focused on making them like quite accessible. So where possible, we've also set them up in a way that you can run locally on most laptops, where you don't necessarily need a Modal API key or a powerful GPU to get started.
That's awesome. And like on that note, who would you say that the Blueprints initiative is for?
Yeah, so I would say like they're primarily built for developers who are just kind of starting in the AI space. Maybe they know how to code and they've kind of done some development on GitHub, etc. But they're a bit new to the space. They're not necessarily like ML experts. So the idea is that with the blueprints, they can kind of find something, get something running quickly, but while also learning a little bit about the tools and the design decisions along the way. That said, if you are if you are an experienced ML developer, this blueprints might be less useful, but it is a community-driven project. So if you are kind of one of those more experienced ML engineers, we'd really love you to kind of contribute and build your own blueprint to kind of showcase your work and showcase the best of kind of open source. And we've got a kind of a GitHub template that you can use to make that easy and so that we have kind of consistency across the different blueprints.
That's great. Do you want to do a little show and tell here?
Absolutely. I would love to. Let me share my screen. Great. So hopefully that's come up for you guys. So yeah, this is kind of our Blueprints website. You can find it at blueprints.mozilla.ai. This is the landing page. So this is where kind of people would kind of enter, and usually we have a new blueprint like most weeks, almost every couple of weeks. And from here, if you navigate to all blueprints at the top right, you can kind of see the list of blueprints that we have so far. And we have 6 so far. Most of them we've developed ourselves to kind of see the ecosystem a little bit. And we got one as well that we developed in collaboration with Flower, this one on fine-tuning an LLM using federated AI, which is a cool one to check out. I'll just kind of give you guys a feel for kind of what like a specific one looks like in practice. So I'll just open up this create your own tailored podcast using a document blueprint. So basically, this one is all around like having a blueprint where you can use open source models, open source tools to convert a document into a podcast featuring 2 speakers. As I kind of mentioned, we try to make a lot of these like a bit more accessible. So this one can be used without needing an external API or without using a GPU. We try and kind of highlight the tools that we use in each one. So here we're kind of showing like we've used Llama CPP, which was important for kind of CPU efficiency. We're using Kokoro, which we found was like a really nice open source model for text to speech. It's really small, works really well. And here we're using Streamlit for the kind of demo app, but we also often use Gradio as well. And what's also nice here is that you've got bits like here you can see the choices. For example, here, like the developer might be interested in like, okay, why have you used this model? Why have you used this approach? We try and kind of explain the decisions that we make along the way, which I think kind of sometimes missing from some documentation. And we also include a kind of step-by-step walkthrough to kind of help people kind of get engaged with it straight away. And the other thing that we like to showcase as well is we like to showcase where the community has kind of taken a blueprint and kind of extended it further and run with it. So for example, here we've got like an example of community members who have taken this document to podcast blueprint, and here this process has extended it to make it multilingual. Pratik has made the document pre-processing a little bit better using Markdown, which is another open source tool. So ideally, people can look through this page, get a kind of good feel for whether the blueprint is going to be useful for them. And then once they want to kind of go and get started, they can click on this Get Started button, which will take them to the blueprint GitHub repo. And then with a kind of couple lines of code, they can kind of get started. This one's quite nice. It has a PyPy library, so it's really easy to test and try yourself.
Can I ask you a question about the sort of, we'll call it like the starter set of blueprints that you guys are coming out of the box with? How did you think about what to create blueprints for, and like what the use cases were, and like what was that process like?
Yeah, so we actually started by asking people. Basically, we actually put out a short survey initially, being like, what do you feel is like missing from the space? What do you wish you kind of could see more of? The document to podcast one, I think, was an interesting case where we saw what Google did when we were getting quite a lot of attention with their, I think it used the Gemini model, and it produced quite a nice podcast. But we felt like there was something missing where it would be nice to make it much more configurable, tailorable to your own needs, and usable without needing kind of an API key, etc. So it's a kind of combination of seeing where we think some of the interest is going, and then also just asking people what they'd like.
And I mean, I'm partially motivated to ask this because you're a product manager. I'm a former product manager. What did I would love to hear a little bit of like the kind of behind the scenes process of like what the product development process looked like for this. Like what are things that changed in between kind of like the very first version of this, like the MVP, and what you deployed and rolled out, in production, and what if there were any interesting kind of like user feedback or like exploratory insights that you kind of gained in that process that maybe impacted changes to the product itself?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the things that we started on was at the beginning we were kind of a little bit more focused on the code side, and kind of trying to create solid repos that people would use. But then one of the kind of insights that we had was that a lot of people, unless they kind of see feedback really quickly these days on if a project is going to be useful to them, they won't necessarily like actually use them. So that's why we kind of added hosted demo functionality, where like, for example, here I can, instantly tell, like, I can like browse and, upload a file and see if it works for you straight away. And I think that was one of the learnings. Like, I think that our developers these days, maybe some of them have a bit more of attention span, but some of them have less, and they really want to have that instant feedback whether a project is going to work for them or not.
That is really interesting. That makes sense. One of the reasons I also was really interested in asking you kind of like who this is for is I think that's one of the hardest things to get right in building something like this. How did you go about like figuring out how to balance the level of detail in sort of like what's happening here, what's under the hood, letting people kind of double click where they might want to, versus abstracting certain things away or making decisions, let's say, that are actually really useful from a usability standpoint for the end user, and like map that to what does the best version of the product look like for the type of developer that you are building this for?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's something that we kind of constantly tweak and adjust as we kind of test and learn things. I think with this project as well, because we want it to be kind of community driven, we also need to make sure that the kind of barrier of entry isn't too high. So when we do things like create a kind of template that people can use, we want it to still be friendly to people, and we don't want people to kind of come to a project and feel like the level of work required to meet the standard is too high. So I think it's about finding a balance. We still want like a level of quality and curation, but we don't want it to be kind of off-putting to people or restrictive, because fundamentally we want this to kind of be community driven.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, from like, there's one specific thing in sort of like the design here that you showed that I think is small, but actually like represents a really important piece of what we're talking about. And that's the part where you kind of show like, these are the elements that we used in making this blueprint. Yes, on the right there. I think like that is the reason I like highlight that is I think that's like such a great balance between like, hey, we want to show you what we're actually using here because you should know this and it's important, but also like we made the decision for you, essentially. Like these are the 3 things we're using. And I think that's something that a lot of AI driven products like struggle to find the balance between. So yeah,
I think that's a great point. I think like we want to showcase the tools we're using. Like we've built something on top of these tools. We want to bring them to life and really show that they're being used to build great things. So I think, yeah, I agree. There's obviously like details where like maybe there's some like small library you're using that you don't always get to showcase, but the main ones, the ones that are really bringing the blueprint to life, we want to showcase those.
Totally. Well, Stefan, thank you so much for joining today. This was fascinating. Really, really appreciate you making the time.
No worries. Thanks very much for having me.